Greetings, everybody. This is going to be I'm excited to do this particular session because this section of Phaladipika, which is the first three texts in the 7th chapter, has finally given me clarity about what people talk about. Not modern people talking about retrogression, but classical astrologers talking about retrogression. Why they've said the things they've said about it, which is generally that it is positive. And also it finally clarified for me a related topic, which is Cheshtapala in the Shadbala. Why Phaladeepika gives the values that it gives to the various speeds that the planet moves. So let that unfold for you naturally the same way that it did for me as we go through these three texts. And then I'll kind of explain it to you in the same order that it started to make sense to me. So what this chapter is, it's following in the heels of chapter 6, which was all about various kinds of yogas. Now, chapter 7, the title of it is Raja Yoga. So you would think that in this chapter he's going to talk about Ninth Lord combining with 10th Lord, etc., but he's not. He actually talked about that. God, I got a hair in my mouth. He actually talked about that really briefly in chapter 6. He's not going to go over it again. So we may not see the detail about Raja Yoga, the technical detail about it, that we find in other books. We have to wait and see what else we find in this chapter and the next. But what he's doing with the term Raja Yoga is he's just using it literally. And he's saying these are the yogas or the configurations in a chart that lead somebody to become a ruler or leader. Raja. So, what he says is very interesting. And not only does it clarify retrogression, before I realized that it clarified retrogression at Cheshtapala, I thought, wow, this clarifies how important context is. Because he's really going to show you context outside of the chart. Of course, you always hear me harp on things about context and what does the rest of the chart mean besides the one thing that you're looking at. But there's an even bigger context, which is this person male or female? Are they in 1943 or are they in 2012? What is the context in which this person exists? Because the stuff in the chart is just squiggles on a paper or it's just dots in the sky. It's not real stuff. You have to understand this. Astrology is a way of translating a squiggle on a paper, which is a representation of a light in the sky, translating that into something real. The translation process, you have to know your target language. Similarly, when you're reading a chart, you have to bear in mind the target, the person that it's applying to. The same symbols in chart A and B applying to two different people can have it's very similar outcomes, but scaled or framed differently. So that's also going to be nicely illustrated. That point is also nicely illustrated in these three texts. So really, we're getting three important lessons here besides learning about what makes a person a ruler. The obvious thing we're learning is what makes a person a ruler, but the other three really important lessons that we're getting is how important it is to consider the context outside of the chart. The second thing is what retrogression really is all about, and therefore what Cheshtapala is really all about. That's the third thing. Let's put on our reading glasses, which are eternally blurry. And maybe I don't need these things. And let's investigate some actual facts. No, I need these babies. Tradyai Ketai Svochagai Kendra Samstahi Swakshastairva Bhupati Syat Prasidhi Panchadhyaistair Anyavangsha Prasutopya. How would you say that? Panchadhyaitais Anyavangsha Prasuto Pure vinato Varanashanga Yukta. 3 or more planets exalted or domicile while in a Kendra, and the person should be a celebrated king. If there are 5, it will be true even if they are not from the ruling class. So also this is teaching the importance of the Mahapurusha Yoga. Remember, I keep saying the Mahapurusha Yoga is the atomic building block for all the rest of the molecules of the yogas, almost all of them. So what is the Mahapurusha Yoga? It's to have a planet in good dignity in a prominent house. So specifically, it's usually defined as a planet in a Kendra, either in domicile or exaltation. So now what he's saying is, if you have a lot of those. So this is also teaching you about cumulative effect. If you have one thing in a chart which shows that the person loves Snickers, then to tell you the truth, the person probably doesn't love Snickers. Because only one thing in a chart is not going to produce an effect that is very visible for a very long time in the person's life. But if you see 3, 4, 5 things in a chart to say this person loves Snickers bars, then that person loves Snickers bars. Go ahead and predict it. Go ahead and say it. So similarly, that's another thing that we're learning from this presentation from Phaladipika is, if you have one Mahapurusha Yoga, that's great. It helps. You have 3. They accumulate. The things which indicate the similar thing accumulate the more that you have them. What he's saying is, if you have 3 planets in this Mahapurusha condition, then the person is going to be really Mahapurusha, a really outstanding person, a really big person, a leader, a king. Then he says, if there's 5 of them, then it will be true even if they're not from the ruling class. So this is showing you the importance of the context of who you're reading for. If you have 3 Mahapurusha Yogas, then you should interpret this person's going to be a king. But what if you're reading the chart of a person who's not royalty, of a person who's not from a political background? Then that has to translate some different way, some other way. You will become the best. If you're reading the chart for a person who's from a businessy family and grew up wanting to be a business person, then that means, man, you are going to be an excellent business person. But he says, if you have 5, that's powerful enough to even override contextual consideration. If you have 5 Mahapurusha Yogas, even if you don't have the context which would support being a king, this person will probably become a king. That's how powerful they'll become. Do you understand so far? So far, nothing about retrogression, but some of the other points are coming up. Everything good? You're following so far? So it's the 2 important points so far are cumulative effect of similar things in a chart. And the second thing is the importance of context. So in other words, like, let me put it to you in a simple way. If you're standing on the end of a plank and I push you, you'll fall to your death. But if you're standing way away from the edge of a cliff or a plank and I push you, you might just stumble. So the push is the same, but the effect that it has is different based on context that you were in. So if the person is in a situation which easily makes them, say, emotional, because of the time, place, gender, etc. that they're born into, and then the chart says that they will be unemotional, it's in that context, it's a pushing away from that contextual point of being emotional. So they'll be less emotional than their peers, but not unemotional. But if they're in a context of a culture, a gender, etc., where they're not brought up to be emotional, and you see that same push towards being not emotional, then they're really not unemotional. Make sense? So let's go on to what he says next. Let me see. I see something about Doritos. Or you can, yeah, like in life, you don't become fat just from one bag of Doritos, but make it 20 and then it stacks up and becomes real. Or cigarettes. Let's say cigarettes cause cancer. It's a fact that cigarettes cause cancer, but it doesn't mean that if I smoke a cigarette, I'm going to get cancer. But if I smoke a lot of them, it probably will, but it still doesn't mean I'm going to get cancer. Maybe my body, for some reason, is resistant to that. So the effect has some effect. It has its effect, but within what context it appears makes a difference. And it's the same exact thing with an astrology chart. The symbolic meaning of the astrology chart shows the powers and the karma, but the extent to the effect that the powers will translate into real things, you have to bear in mind your translation destination, your destination language. Where's the starting point or the norm? What's the normative for this person? The astrology chart is very abstract, so that it's showing you deviations from norms. But you have to translate that to what's the norm of the person you're reading for. Now, let us proceed to the next one. The next one. Bhupasyur nipavangshajas tuyadi duryoge najatastata. Hyantar dhirna hichit karat. This is where you start to get on the topic of retrogression. But it's sneaky. Hyantar dhirna hichit karat dina karaj jana spurantyeva te. Tradyai kendragatai swabhocha sahitair bhupodbhava parthiva. Martyastvanya kulodbhava kshipitatestuya kadachin nripa. So he says, if you're nripa vamshaja, if you're born in a ruling class, then you should probably become rulers. Simple. Unless you have duryogas, bad yogas. So this is what he's really taking the extent of context now. He's really illustrating context in an exaggerated way. He's saying, look, if your context is that your father is a king, then you don't need a really special astrology chart to become a king. If you just have a normal chart, which without bad things in it, then you'll become a king because that's normative for you in your context. This is actually really groundbreaking and important. I never hear people talking about this. Maybe they talk about it in other circles than what I listen to. I've always thought this way. I've always worked this way, because when you read charts, you realize that this is the way it is. But it's not something that's commonly discussed. People tend to think Aries sun means X, therefore expect these effects. But it actually means in something abstract, and you have to translate the effect to a norm, which can slide. Okay. So, Bhupasur Nripa Vangshajas tu Yadi Duryoge. If you're born in a king's family, then you'll become a king unless there's something bad in your chart. So he says, and what would be bad? One thing that would be bad would be to have a dur yoga, a bad yoga. There is this yoga specifically named dur yoga, but in this case, he's just meaning if you have negative yogas. And then he says, or, especially if if you have a lot of planets combust by dinakara, by the sun, then they will not be able to shine. Or it's actually saying if a lot of planets are consumed in the shine of the sun. This is where it starts. Actually, this is where we start to unravel the mystery of the retrogression. So it's bringing up an important point, and you have heard this before in Phaladipika a lot of times, although I haven't really probably focused on it very much, because it's not something that was in my radar as being super important. But at this point, it seems like he's repeated this point enough that it's actually very important. How bright the planet is. If planets are bright, then their effects should be interpreted to their effects, their symbolic meanings should be interpreted to be strong because they're bright. If planets are dim or invisible, then what they symbolize should be interpreted to be dimmed or invisible. How? This is where it starts to come to have a bearing on retrogression and Cheshtabala. How does a planet get brightness or dimness? Think about that, and we will continue. So he's saying, Bhupasyur nipravanshajastu yadidur yoge najatas tata yantar dhirna hi chet karadina karajana spurantyevate. If you're born in a king's family, you'll become a king if your chart is normal, which means it doesn't have bad things, like especially all the planets are dim, because they're combusted by the sun. They're invisible. So that's your clue about how they become bright or invisible. It has to do with their distance from the sun. If you want an easy way to understand the varying brightnesses of the planets, take the moon as an example. Because it's very obvious with the moon, and it's very easy to see how the moon goes from being invisible to being super big and full. And then it has a gradient in between. Crescents, halves, etc. It's obvious to see that the moon does it because the moon is very big. So guess what? Every planet does the same thing. Because every planet is actually a ball, just like the Earth, the moon. Every planet does the same thing, but because they're so small, you don't notice their shape changing with your naked eye, but you notice the brightness varying. And the mechanics, you should ask yourself, what are the mechanics behind the moon changing its shape? If you investigate what the mechanics are behind the moon changing its shape, it's all about the relative angle between the moon and the sun and the earth. If the moon is 180 degrees opposite to the sun from the earth, then it's full. If the moon is 0 degrees opposite to the sun from the earth, then it's invisible. You can only see the backside, which means you can only see the shadow, which means you can't see it. It's because it's nighttime. And if it's halfway between on either side, then you'll see half of the moon, etc. Those are the mechanics. Those are the exact same mechanics that cause the rest of the planets to do the same exact thing, which we don't perceive as this change in their shape because they're too small, but we perceive it in a change in their brightness. And the amount of their brightness is very, very important to how you interpret the effects. Although we have ignored this and forgotten this in 90% of our modern practice of astrology. Very likely because we ceased to even look at them. We ceased to even look at the sky. Since we got the math down right, we just started doing it on paper, and then since we got computers, forget about it. We don't even care what the math is. Just one person has to know what the math is. All right, so to finish up this statement, Thradyai kendragatai svabocha sahitar bhupod bhava parthivi martyastvanya kulod bhava kshitipates tulya kadachin nripa. Basically saying the same thing. If such persons have 3 or more planets, there's two things. If such person has 3 or more planets exalted or domiciled while in Kendra, they will increase their kingdoms and power. And then another point is the same conditions for those who are normal, martyas, and not of a ruling class, anyakula. They can become as powerful as kings, kshitipate tula. And kadachin nripa. Sometimes they can actually become kings, literally. Now, here again, you see context. He's illustrating the importance of context. So what he said here is just 3 conditions. 1, your pop is the king. 2, your father is not the king, but you're in a royal lineage. You're in a royal political family, you have a political background. 3, you don't have any kind of political connections. Those 3 conditions in the individual with the same chart. If all 3 individuals have a normal chart without any bad yogas and without all the planets being very dim, then person A will become a king, person B will become a regular ruler, and person C will become just a regular person, because that's their starting points. If you present all three with a different chart, but again the same chart, where you have 3 planets exalted or domicile while in a Kendra, 3 planets in Mahapurush Yoga, and it's not just 3 is a number, but he's talking about increase, and 3 is the middle point. So with a lot of planets in Mahapurush Yoga, or you can just extrapolate it even more, a lot of powerful things in the chart. And the person who's born with his, like, he's born to be the king, he's the prince, born as the prince. That guy is not just going to be a regular king, he's going to be a king that increases the kingdom. Going to be a very powerful king. The second one is the person that's born in a political background with like a royalty, etc. They will become a king. And that same chart for a person that's got no kind of political connections, they might become Chitpate Stula, like a king in some context. So like a king of the restaurant industry, or like a king of pop or something, like a king of music, depending on what their context is. And yep, that's everything, right? So those are all the points that were covered in this second text. Is it all clear? I want to make sure everything is clear before we go on. And the first thing he's saying, the more planets you have powerful, the more powerful the person becomes. And then relative to their norm. So if they're not a ruling class, it takes a lot of power in the chart, like everything powerful. Then they can make even them a king. But if they are from the ruling class, then it's a medium amount of power in there will make them a king. And if they are literally a prince, then it's just a normal amount of power will make them a king. And we learned what would make a prince not become a king would be less than normal amount of power. So they have bad yogas, or all the planets are weak by virtue of being dim, by virtue of being combust. Any questions? No, you got it, Spacebug. Let's look at the third text now. Yadyeko pi virajit angshunikara sustango vakrago nichasto pikaroti pupa sadrisham dvauva trayova graha evam chejjanayanti bhupati nami Shashtangsha Rashi Stitas Tatvachet Vahavo Nipam Samakutach Chatrolasach Chamaram. Even one planet shining brightly during retrogression in a good house should make a person be like a king, even if it's debilitated. If there are 2 or 3 such planets, they certainly should be a renowned and praised king. If these conditions are mirrored in the Amsa charts as well, this person becomes an extremely opulent and successful king. This text is very important. Misunderstanding of this text is what I think is the root of confusions about retrogression. So in the previous text, he said, if you don't have a lot of planets combust, then you should become a king if you're born in a king's family. Now, in the next statement that he's going to say is how important it is how bright the planets are. So he says, even if you just have one, yadi ekapi, even if you just have one planet with virajit angshuni, with very bright, and vakraga means retrogressed. So this, where I just used the word end, right? If they're very bright and retrogressed, that's the mistake. I'll give you a few minutes to try to figure out why that's a mistake before I say why. It's not end retrogressed. Yadyekopi virajit angshanikara sustango vakrajo. If they are brightly retrogressed, even one planet brightly retrogressed in a good house, nichastopi, even if it's debilitated, not if it's debilitated, not and debilitated, even if, uppy, you see uppy twice even in the same exact spot. Yadyekopi, even if just one, nichastopi, even if it's debilitated. So it's not like debilitation is a good condition for the retrogressed planet. This is a big mistake, and I always thought this was weird. He's not saying you need a retrogressed debilitated planet, even one. He's saying you need a retrogressed bright planet in a good spot, even if it's debilitated, even if it's only one. Then Bhupasadrisham, they'll become like a king, even if it's just one. And then Dvaova, Trayova, if you have two or three, then Evam Che, then they will definitely, Janayanti Bhupati Nam, they will definitely become a famous and praised king. Shashta Nami Bhupati. And then the third thing he says is if it's the Amshas, and if the Amsha Rashis also have these conditions, then they are a Nripa with Chatra and Chamra. They are the most opulent, they're extremely opulent and successful king. Chamra is fans and Chatra is umbrellas. Are you getting it? Let me see what you're saying. So VL wants to know what indicates the brightness. I'm asking you to figure out why it's not bright and retrogressed. Why is that a mistake? That's related to what you're asking, VL, which is what indicates the brightness. Now for this, I wish that I had some kind of software to give you a visual aids. Let me see what this thing is. I just downloaded this like solar system modeler. It has funny music to it. Took up my whole screen. They want me to spend $6 a month. And I will have to look at this later. You do not pay anything it's too much. I can't do it right now while live. But it took over my whole screen. I shall cancel it. I'll look at this later and I'll see if it's something worth using. I hate these subscription things where you pay on a monthly basis. All right, I wanted to have some kind of a visual aid to help you see this. You can actually find them by Googling them, but I'll just use my hands and you guys use your imagination so that you can visualize these things. I want to explain to you how you will understand the brightness of a planet and what that means towards the planet's motion and retrogression. How will you figure it out with the moon? How do you figure out a planet's brightness if it's the moon? I'll give you some visuals. Hang on a second. Here, let me put this on the screen. Is this? Yes. I'll give you some visuals here. What is it right now? The sun is here right now, right? So let's get these guys out of the way so the chart's not cluttered. And let's talk about this. Is this moon bright or dim? Can you tell? If you say dim, you're right. Why is it dim? Because it's close to the sun. What does this actually mean? This is a map on paper of something in the sky. What does it correspond to in the sky? It corresponds to the moon being close to the sun, it means it's, when you look from the earth, it means the moon is here and the sun is here. Because the moon's going like this. Now, if you put the moon here, is it brighter or dimmer than it was before? You should be able to say quickly that it's brighter. Why? Because it's increased its distance. So in this range over here, you would see a moon that's like more than a crescent, but not quite a half. And as the moon moves this way, is it waxing or is it waning? It's waxing. When you put the moon here, you get Ashtami, you get half moon. Where would you put this moon to get it to be the most bright that it could possibly be? Well, for that, we need to know the sun's degree. So let's say 5. Let's say the sun is at 5 degrees. We want to put the moon opposite to the sun. Exactly opposite to the sun. This moon is perfectly full. This is the brightest that the moon will get, ever. So that's the mechanic to tell how bright a planet is. Now, instead of doing it with the moon, let's try to do it with Mars. I'll just keep this here actually because 5 is the 180 point. If Mars is here, is it bright? It's completely not bright. It's invisible. If the moon is here, is it visible? It's absolutely invisible. It's called a new moon. If it's at 5 degrees, this moon here at 5 degrees Aries with the sun at 5 degrees Aries is absolutely invisible. You will only see the shadow. So it's any planet that's coming over here is going to get invisible. It's not only because the sun is bright, it's because the planet is getting dim for the same reason as the moon. Its phase, the amount of shadow that you see on the globe versus the amount of light is decreasing the more that it's not on the other side of the sun from you, the more that it's on the sun's side. And you're going to see more and more of its shadow side. So Mars right here is completely invisible. Mars right here is a little bit brighter. It's about halfway to its maximum brightness. And Mars right here, its maximum brightness. Is that weird? That's exactly the same as the moon. Because it's exactly the same principle. What is the angle between the Earth, the planet, and the sun will show you the amount of brightness that comes from that object. The amount of sunlight that bounces off it to you. The planet itself is always putting half of its side bright and half of its side dark. But the way that you're looking at the planet changes based on your angle. You may see it from the side so that you see half of it dark, half of it bright. You may see it from the front so you only see the bright half. You may see it from the back so you only see the dark half. So what this means here is, on this paper right here, what it means from the sky is the sun is on one side, the Earth is in the middle, and Mars is on the other side when you have opposition from the sun. So that's the simple way that you will determine brightness. You just take a ratio of how close it is to 180 degrees away from the sun. If it's exactly 180 degrees from the sun, it's 100% brightness. If it's exactly 0, it's 0% brightness. If it's halfway, like 90 degrees from the sun, then it's half brightness. You just do a ratio and you know exactly how bright the planet is. Now, what about retrogression? Brightness and retrogression are inseparable. That's why you can't say if this planet is very bright and retrogressed, because they're not separable conditions. Let me now explain to you why that happens. For this, you need to use your imagination so that you can imagine the visuals I'm going to tell you. Thank you, Red. So try to use your imagination so you can visualize this. Motion is relative between objects. That sounds like Einstein, but it's very simple. If you're in a car and you're going 25 miles an hour down the street. That 25 miles an hour means relative to the street. If there's a car next to you going 20 miles an hour, then your speed relative to that car is 5 miles an hour. And if there's a car on the other side coming this direction, also going 25 miles an hour, then that speed is probably, I don't know the exact physics, but let's say it's 50 miles an hour. That's why a head-on collision is the worst. So motion is relative to the object that you're referring to. In space, the basic motions is that the sun is in the middle and everything is moving around it. This is the reason why the sun will never retrogress. Because retrogression is an effect of relative motion, the complications of relative motion. But the sun is the reference point. It stands still by reference. So you'll never have retrogression viewed from the Earth of the sun. Nor will you have retrogression of the moon, because the moon's relationship to the sun changes with the Earth. It's moving the same speed as the Earth, but then it's just circling around the Earth. So you do get slight variations in the moon's speed, but it's never enough to come anywhere close to making it stop or go backwards. The rest of the planets, I should have showed you a little bit about inner planets. But if you remind me about showing you the brightness for the inner planets, I'll come back to that later. The rest of the planets, they are tricky. Their speed varies greatly. And the reason why their speed varies greatly is because they're moving and we're moving relative to the same object, the sun. So imagine a planet like Mars. It's actually the most drastic with Mars because the Mars is closest to us. So imagine a planet like Mars. And imagine it going around the sun. Then imagine Earth going around the sun also a little bit closer than Mars and a little bit faster. Because it's closer, it's a smaller circuit. Okay? So now what you do is you look out from Earth. When you look out from Earth, you see Mars against some background. Like, let's say, against a star. As you move, so Mars, it's moving. Itself is moving. So it's the stars or zodiac slices that it's against will change as it moves, the visual from the Earth. But your point of reference is also moving. So the speed at which it changes, the speed at which Mars changes its position, apparent position, is not constant. The more you accelerate towards Mars, the more Mars appears to slow down. Then when you come to be the same speed as Mars, it appears to stand still. And then as you go past it, it appears to go backwards. Then because you're going, so you can imagine that with two cars again. So to bring it home and make it something real. You got a car in the distance and your car is going. The car is moving. You could see that it's moving against other things. But if you're increasing, like let's say there's a tree, a car, and your car, and you're both moving, but you're moving a little faster than that car, then that car will appear to, as you accelerate towards your acceleration increases the apparent motion against the tree of that car. But as you go back, it will decrease the apparent acceleration against the tree. And so as you get further and further away from the car, that car will appear to like get closer to the tree again. So that's the effect of relative motion or on apparent motion, on apparent observations. So let's bring it back to the solar system. The Earth, let's say you have Mars and it's just here. And then you have the Earth and it's going like this. When the Earth is here and here, you'll have two key points. And as the Earth comes towards Mars, Mars's apparent motion will increase. The speed of its motion will increase. Or decrease, actually. It will decrease. Because your angle to Mars is increasing. So Mars will appear to slow down. Like Mars is moving like this, Earth is moving like this. See? So if you draw a line from this finger, Earth, through Mars, pointing it somewhere, it will go fast, slow, slow down, stop, come back, slow down, stop, come back, and go fast again, which is exactly what you see in the sky. So as the Earth comes up to Mars, Mars slows down. As it hits equal with Mars, Mars stops, and then as it passes Mars, Mars backs up, retrogresses. And then, because it's a circle, it's not like the two cars on a straight road. Because it's a circle, the two things are moving in an orbit. Then, as it increases past Mars, it will increase the speed that Mars appears to be going backwards until it's getting to an angle again because of being on a circle. It will slow down the backwards motion, then it will line up with it again so that it appears to stop. Then it will start to increase its forward speed. And then it will decrease the forward speed, etc. So that's the basics of the mechanics. Not every detail might be right. I'm not an astronomer, but that is basically what's going on with the retrogression. Why there is such a thing as retrogression. Now, what does this have to do with light and the brightness of a planet? Can you answer that question? Because that's the key. It has the two of them are inseparable. Think about this. A lot of times you probably have heard people say, when a planet retrogresses, it's the closest to the Earth. Is that true? Yes. See? This is the Earth. This planet is not retrogressed. But this planet is retrogressing as the Earth is over here when it's close. Is that a big deal? It's not a particularly big deal. It is a bit of a big deal. It will make the planet slightly visibly bigger, slightly, especially maybe from Mars. But very, very, very difficult to notice with Jupiter and practically impossible to notice with Saturn because the relative amount of change is very small compared to the distance between the two things. Is that what's important, that the planet is close to the Earth? No, but what happens if the Earth is close to the planet? What does it mean? What does it mean? The sun is on the other side. The only time that the Earth can get close to a planet, here, the Earth is furthest away from a planet. That means the sun is in the middle. That means if you try to look at that planet, you'll have to look through the sun. The planet will appear to be close to the sun. It will be difficult to see. When the Earth is far from a planet, it actually joins up with the sun visually in the sky. It appears to join with the sun and therefore becomes invisible. But when you get close to the planet, now you're on the same side of the sun with the planet. So the planet will always be bright. So retrogression always has to do with brightness. Let me show you now on a chart. Let me see if I can pick this up. Let me see if I can get this guy on the screen for you. Whoa, not that one. I wanted this one. Okay, let's put this on screen. How will I do that? All right, this is going to be ugly for a second because I didn't prepare it in advance. But give me 1 second and I'll get it to work. I told you. 1 second. Actually, it might not be too bad to just fill up the whole screen with this so you can see. Let's make it so you can at least see the whole circle. All right, there's a circular chart because it's very easy to see with circular. There's no distortion. So let's take a look at the relative brightnesses right now and whether or not things are retrogressing or not. There's no no retrogressive planets right now. In fact, there's no bright planets right now. The moon, which is quickly changing, is at about half brightness. Hopefully you can see that. The sun is at 22 degrees of Aries, and the moon is at 23 degrees of Leo, so it's actually exactly trine, more or less exactly trine, and therefore it's going to be at about 3/5 of brightness. But the rest of the planets are dim. So let's go forward in time until we get a planet to become bright. We go by 7-day increments. They're still very dim. Here we are in May, mid-May. There's only dim planets, besides the moon, which is very quickly cycling through being dim and bright. Still very dim. The brightest planet is Saturn, really. That also explains our current situation. All the planets are dim. The brightest planet is Saturn. All the planets are dim. The brightest planet is Saturn. Now, there's something I have to show you about the inner planets. But still, all of these inner planets are dim, actually, right now. They're still all dim. Wait. Look what happened with Saturn. At some point, Saturn retrogressed. It was actually when Saturn was a bit more than square to the sun. So when it was a bit more than halfway from the sun, Saturn retrogressed. So now, watch as the sun moving is actually making Saturn more brighter. While it's retrogressed, look where the sun goes. It's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. Let's keep your eye on Saturn's relationship to the sun. It remains retrogressed while the sun is at about 150 degrees to it. Now it's at the brightest that it will ever be is actually right now, August 16th. Saturn is fully bright. Guess what? It's retrogressed. Guess what? It's mid-retrogression right now. Now you can also, if you take your eyes off Saturn for a second and look at Jupiter, at some point along the line, I missed the fact that Jupiter went retrogressive. And look at the angle now between Jupiter and the sun. It's more than 75%. It's more than a trine, right? Actually, so Saturn went retrogression at a square. Let's see Jupiter. When did it go retrogress? Jupiter went retrogression at a trine. Went into retrogression at a trine. That's interesting. Now, we see Saturn, and now this Jupiter and Saturn are bright. You cannot be bright without being retrogressive. Because this means that the Earth is close to Saturn right now, which is why the sun is shining fully on Saturn. And you don't have to look through it to see that. So, like I said, mid-August, you get Saturn being the brightest it will ever be, while Jupiter is also bright, getting brighter. Now, as you move forward to September, you got Jupiter and Saturn are equally bright relative to their normal brightness. Saturn is very further than Jupiter, so its brightest is still Saturn at its brightest is less bright than Venus at its dimmest. Of course, Venus can go invisible, but excluding invisibility. So when you say a planet is bright, it's not objective brightness, but relative to its normal brightness. And then here you would have Jupiter being at its maximum brightness, because you see how it's related to the sun. Is it retrograde? Yes. Is Mars retrograde yet? No, but I bet you it's going to happen soon. Because look at the angle that Mars is getting to the sun. And also, let's try to figure out when Saturn's going to come out of retrogression. It came out right there, see? So when it got to about a trine to the sun again, it comes out of retrogression. Mars goes into retrogression here when it's a bit more than a trine. When it's 8 houses from the sun. This may also explain the special aspects. So you see this mechanic, this has eluded us or me for a long time. Mars is at its maximum brightness. Is it retrogressive? Yes. Is Saturn at its maximum brightness anymore? Not even close. Is it retrogressing? No. I hope this is correct. This is a new discovery. Good. It survived. The theory survived. Okay. Does that make sense to you now? Retrogression is an indicator of strength because retrogression is synonymous with brightness. This is the key point. Furthermore, about Cheshtabala, the Cheshtabala has this weird distribution of points to it. I would expect, if I was making the system from scratch, Cheshtabala, the speed on which how the speed of the planet impacts its strength, I would assume I'll pick either slowness as being stronger or fastness as being stronger. And then I would say, let's say I pick slowness as being stronger, then I would say the slower it is, the stronger it is, the faster it is, the weaker. Because whatever your theory is, but you would expect that you would have a ratio like that. But when you read Phaladipika's explanation for Cheshtabala's scores, it's not like that at all. It's completely different. That it's not sequential. But the speeds almost surely correspond to the brightness of the planet. So what you're talking about with Cheshtabala from Phaladipika's point of view is probably brightness bala. All right, let me mention about the inner planets. The inner planets. So I'm going to go back to this view, where you can see this chart. Does the same thing happen with inner planets? Do inner planets go retrogress? Yes, they do. But they will break the rule of going retrogression distant from the sun. That was very fascinating too, wasn't it? Mars goes retrogress when it's in when the sun is 8 houses from it. Jupiter goes retrogress when the sun is 5 houses from it. And Saturn goes retrogress when the sun is 4 from it. So Saturn goes retrogress at square, Jupiter goes retrogress at trine, and Mars goes retrogress at what, I don't know what the name for that is, but at the 8th house, 6th house angle. Semisextile. And those are the special aspects of the planets. Saturn has a special aspect on a square. Mars has a special aspect on the 8th, and Jupiter has a special aspect on a trine. That is an interesting coincidence, at least, or it may actually be part of the explanation of why the system was developed that way. The inner planets, they don't have special aspects. Maybe it's related to this also. Do the inner planets obey this rule that their distance from the sun determines their brightness? Of course. Every single thing in the sky obeys the rule that its distance from the sun determines its brightness. Because like I said, everything is a ball and has half of its face lit up by the sun and half not, half in shadow. And so your angle towards that thing will show you more of the bright side or less of the bright side, depending on where you are relative to it. But the only difference between the inner planets and the outer planets is their maximum distance from the sun is less than 180 degrees. Because when you look at them from the sun, they can never be far away from the sun. They're on the inside of the earth. So they can never be far from the sun because you're always looking towards the sun to see them. So the maximum that Venus goes away from the sun is approximately 60 degrees. And the maximum that Mercury goes away from the sun is approximately 30 degrees. So you'll see Mercury at its maximum brightness when it's at 30 degrees, approximately. And Venus at its maximum brightness when it's at 60. And you will notice Venus. This is why you all of a sudden, sometimes in the year, this will happen on a 9-month basis. Sometimes in the year, you'll be like, damn, what is that glorious star in the sky? Early sky, the early night sky. This is this big, brilliant, shiny thing that you don't see the rest of the time. Because it's Venus. And when Venus is getting to 60 degrees, it's out in the sky when the sky is quite dark still. And it's bright as all get out. So it's just like in the sky, and you notice it like it looks like a second moon. Hence, it's called Shukra, which means brilliant. So Venus will get its maximum brightness. They'll follow the same principle as the rest of the planets. But it's just that their maximum is not 180. Their maximum is whatever their maximum is. So Venus would get maximum, Venus would get maximum brightness here. Let's say it's 5 degrees. Or even here, if the sun is positioned there in Aries. Mercury, this is why, have you ever heard classic texts say this is an extremely desirable condition? To have Venus, Mercury, and the sun in consecutive signs. This is an extremely good yoga. The part of the reason is, or if not the whole reason is, they're at maximum brightness. Venus and Mercury. How important maximum brightness is and how much we've ignored it is kind of inspiring that maybe we can get better if we stop ignoring it. Do the inner planets retrogress? Yes, they do. What schedule do they retrogress on? I'm not sure. You want to check it out? Let's check it out. Let me switch you back over to this. So we have to go back to this, and we can check out when it actually happens. So why don't we just, actually, you want to see, let me show you that you'll only get Venus. I'll only show you these planets. Okay? And Saturn can leave too. So now you can see Venus. I probably should have did this before, so it'll be less confusing. Apologies. Venus here is what? More than 30 degrees away. So this would be about half bright. A little more than half bright. How far will Venus? Oh, Venus now is coming towards. Let's go backwards in time. There, Venus went retrograde. Interesting that it went retrogress at 30 degrees. No. Went retrogression very close to the sun. Let's get rid of Mercury so we don't get confused. Let's just look at Venus. Time is going forward now. Mercury, Venus has slowed down and went backwards because it was retrogress at this point. When it got as close as it got to the sun. Now it's catching up. Is it going to flip to the other side? Is it going to be able to cross the sun? It crossed the sun. It went to the other side. Now it's closing in on, it's exactly 30 degrees away. Is it going to keep going? Now it is close to, nope. It retrogressed, the sun caught up to it. And so the Earth's motion makes Venus retrogress kind of unpredictably. And sometimes it can't get to maximum 60. Let's see. So the maximum actually seems less than 60. What they say is 2 signs away is the most that you can get. This appears to be the maximum. We seem to be near the maximum now. We could look this up. You could look this up. Probably Google even would give you, what's the maximum distance of Venus from the sun, etc. Maximum visual distance. Mercury too. That's a different thing. I need to figure it out offline and then explain it to you. But by now you should know a couple of things. And before concluding, I want to just review all the stuff to put it back on one page. You should know the mechanics of retrogression. You should know the mechanics of brightness or phase. Planets have phases just like the moon and caused by the exact same reason. And so let's put it all back into context of what was written in Phaladipika. So he started off by saying, Tradyai ketai svak ochagair kendra sangstita swarksha stair va bhupati syat prasida panchadhyai stair anyavangsha prasuto pi urvinato varanasangayukta. You can just make this P because it's at the end of the line. 3 or more planets exalted or domiciled while in a Kendra, the person should be a celebrated king. If there are 5, it will be true even if it's not for the ruling class. So here we learned the importance of context. We spoke about that at the beginning. That the astrology chart signifies a deviation from a norm, but the norm is determined by the actual person and their actual circumstances. If the person is already in a political family or in a king's background, then it doesn't take that much great stuff in the chart to make them a king. But if they're from a family that's unrelated to politics, it takes a lot of great stuff to make them a king. Bhupasyur nipravangshajas tu yadi duryoge na jatas tata yanta dhirna hi chet karadina karajka janas purantyevate thradyai ke kendra katha swabhocha sahitar bhupodbhava Partiva Martyastvanya Kulodbhava Chitipate Stulya Kadachin Nipa. People born in the ruling class should become rulers unless they're born with bad yogas or with planets that cannot shine because they're eclipsed by the rays of the sun. This is where he's setting up all this stuff that we discussed. If such persons have 3 or more planets exalted or domiciled while in a Kendra, they will increase their kingdoms in power. The same conditions for those not of the ruling class can become as powerful as kings, or sometimes literally become kings. We talked about that. Again, it's illustrating the importance of the context. The astrology chart shows you how much energy is going in a certain direction, but how far that actually goes depends on the starting point. And the starting point is determined by the real person. So the same chart applied to a prince produces different results than the same chart applied to a shoemaker. If you have a normal chart and you're a shoemaker, then you'll wind up a shoemaker. If you have a normal chart and you're a prince, then you'll wind up the king. Okay, now this introduced something new. That was the end of the discussion on context. Now it introduces this thing about the mechanics of retrogression and brightness, because he mentioned how important it is to have planets be bright. He said the one way that a prince could not become a king is if he has no bright planets. So in the next statement, he says, Yadyeko pi virajit ashunikara sushtango vakrago. No, that's missing something. Yadyeko pi virajit anshunikara sustangnago vakrago. Nichasto pi karoti pupa sadrisham dvauva trayova graha. Evam chet janayanti bhupati nami sashtangsa rashistitas. Tadvasched vahovo nripam samakutach. Chatrola Satchamaram. Even one planet shining brightly during retrogression is in a good house should make a person be like a king, even if it's debilitated. So previous statement, he said, if a prince has no bright planets, then they may not even become the king. Even though it's normal for them to become the king, their chart is less than normal. But if they have even one planet, then they should become a king, even if they have one bright planet. And so he describes this bright planet that it would be retrograde. And that's what got us down this discussion of understanding what retrogression is. And it says not and debilitated, but even if debilitated. It's not that retrogression is ideal in a debilitation. No, retrogression makes the planet strong. So even if it is debilitated, it's still strong. It can overcome problems. Why is it strong when it's retrogressed? Because it's bright. Because you cannot be retrogressed without being bright. And every planet will have its maximum brightness in the middle of its retrogression. I don't know about Venus and Mercury. Definitely we verified this with Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Even one planet shining brightly during retrogression in a good house should make a person be like a king, even if it's debilitated. If there are 2 or 3 such planets, means if you have 2 or 3 planets that not just are bright, like what are you seeing on screen right now? Like here, Venus is bright and in a good house. So is Mercury. Mercury is debilitated, but who cares? That's what he's saying. It's bright and in a good house. That's more important than being debilitated. But other planets like Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and this, while the sun is in Aries, and if Taurus is rising, they can't really get to be that great. Because for them to be maximum brightness, they come over here into the 6th house. But here would be better. They're pretty close to maximum brightness and in a good house, and this is even still better. Because Kendras are particularly good. So, of course, this would be ideal for Mars. But any planet there would be bright. So here you have an example of 3 of these planets being great. And so what did he say about that? If there are 2 or 3 such planets, they certainly should be a renowned or praised king. Not even just a normal king, if they're from a good background, from the kingly background. And then he says, if these conditions are mirrored in the Amsha charts as well, the person becomes extremely opulent and successful king. In other words, if the planets are bright in the Amshas, which means not literal brightness, but symbolic brightness in the Amshas by virtue of that distance from the sun. That theoretical distance from the sun. All right. So I'll take a look and see what questions there are now. I think everything you explained. I explained retrogression and how it is inseparable from brightness and how important brightness is to understand how influential the planet can be and how much power it has. Maybe that's it, Loannis, or Johannes. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Can Venus exceed 48? That might be maximum 48. It did look that way when we did the charts. It looked about 48. Whatever it is, you can look it up. And when it's at that maximum brightness, it would be brightest. And its retrogression would have some relationship to that. Horyu says, Hellenistic astrology has a turn for Venus and Mercury being in the heart of the sun. And that's very special. Have you found anything like that in Phaladipika? If I did, I forgot it. But it's the situation that when the planet approaches the sun, it becomes invisible. It dims as it approaches the sun, and then it just becomes totally invisible for 2 reasons. One is that maybe you're seeing the back of it, and for an inner planet. For the outer planet, it's that you're trying to look at it through the sun's glare, and you can't. But they specify that the sun is the source of all the energy. So what's going on symbolically is the planet is restoring its battery power by conjoining with the sun. So it's losing battery power as it approaches the sun, but when it hits the sun, it's getting some kind of a charge. And they like to see it not only hit the sun by its horizontal degree, but also by its vertical degree. And if this planet crosses the sun exactly by vertical and horizontal degree, it gets to supercharge, which will make it very positive for the exit from the sun. That's basically the theory, as far as I understood it, of Kazemi, and I haven't yet seen it discussed in Phaladipika. Okay, Horyu explained it better. Mercury is between 18 and 28 always. So Mercury is between 18 and 28 always. That's very interesting. So in other words, it doesn't even get closer than 18. This doesn't seem possible. This is not possible. It must be wrong. Because Mercury can be right with the sun. I have a daughter who was born like that. Does a bright moon count as one of the planets? Yes. So that's why the basic thing is, well, this moon is bright. Very good. We like to see charts with full moons, bright moons. Jonathan, oh wait, let's see, Commodore. Astrology software doesn't take into account a retro planet in natal being different in divisionals. What does that mean? You should also consider the planet retrogressive in the divisionals because it doesn't change its motion. Ah, I see. So in a divisional chart, you can get a retrogressive planet that's not in the bright spot. That's very interesting. That was actually weird what he said at the end. Just he said Angsha Rashis. But he says Rashi. So he's saying it's an Amsha, so it's theoretical. So now just look at the Rashis of the Amsha. Don't take the rest of the stuff into account. Thank you, Ed. I really looked forward to doing it as well. Jonathan says the Amsha is a bit confusing. Yeah, right. If we see Jupiter in Libra and Sun in Aries in an Amsha, is that a symbolic brightness? I don't know. I haven't done it. It's new theory, etc. But I would say my working theory is yes. That's what he means. But that answer is pending on verification. What for dignity interpretation of retrogression of planets? So retrogression doesn't reverse dignity, it overcomes dignity. I don't know. You have statements here and there that about this weird thing about retrogression with debilitation and exaltation. But keep it in the same basket with what you just learned today. That retrogression makes a planet strong, even if it is debilitated. Yes, very good. So in that case, we don't interpret that a retrogress planet in exaltation is bad. We interpret that it's very good. All right. So that was super good. Very interesting stuff. I feel like I understand the mechanics of astrology more. And I hope you guys all do too. I'll see you hopefully in 2 days. Thank you.